Good morning, Hannah.
Good morning.
We don't usually record an episode this early in the morning.
And by
But here we
morning,
are.
you mean like 11.
It's 10:57, okay?
Oh, okay.
Give me a
okay.
break. For the audience, no exorbitant amount of time has passed. We post episodes every 2 weeks. But for us, we've had a huge break.
Yeah, because I feel like we batch recorded maybe like the last couple. I don't know if we got like excited and we watched maybe a couple in a row.
We recorded them in quick succession. But then when we got up to Citizen Kane, I think because of its legacy, we started maybe dreading it a bit and putting it off just because we were afraid that it was going to be overrated.
Well,
What was your take?
part of the problem was we stopped it part of the way through. And once you stop a movie part of the way through and then you have to go back to it, it's a little bit of a dread because like you don't have the momentum of watching it the first time.
Yeah, but we stopped for a good reason, in my opinion.
I can't remember what that
You can't
was.
remember?
It was like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, we stopped 48 minutes in,
Okay.
and we stopped because I got sick and I lost my voice.
Oh,
And I said,
see.
well, if we can't record the episode right after we finish watching it, then I don't want to finish it. So then we stopped for like multiple weeks
Like a month at least.
to give me a chance to get better and get my voice back, which I did. Then I lost it again, belting it out at Rock Band.
That was a choice.
It was a great choice.
It was
a
very
fun night.
funny though. You're just like, give me no, okay.
I sounded a little bit better than that, but
Yeah.
American Idiot's a little bit high for my register. But anyway,
Yeah.
so I lost it again, then eventually slowly got it back, and then just got busy with other stuff. So then last night we finally sat down and continued. I asked you if you wanted to recap the beginning. You said no. We did anyway because I forgot most of it. Not most of it, but like
I knew where we were.
the standout scene in my brain was like the dancing scene, like the "Oh Mr. Kane" song scene. And I
Oh,
was
I
like,
suppose.
I don't want that to be my core memory of the first 48 minutes of this.
I suppose.
So I need a bit of a refresher. And I'm glad that we did that.
Yeah, it was good to just get like a feel of the whole thing.
Right.
We watched so many movies in between, like
What did we
stopping
watch?
Citizen Kane though. Well, we went on sort of a mumblecore
Oh yeah,
start.
yeah.
I watched American Psycho because I read the book, so I was comparing that to the book.
Another movie that you stopped halfway through.
That was one of my great unfinished. I watched like part of it on a bus, and then I'm like, I think this is inappropriate to watch on a bus, and then I stopped for like 6 years.
I watched it in class in like grade 9 on my phone.
That's even more inappropriate.
I know. The screen was facing the wall, so.
Yeah.
And then I came home and I put on a disposable like pouch plastic raincoat, and I grabbed a kitchen knife from the kitchen, and then I knocked on my brother's door, and then I said, "Guess what I watched?" And he probably thought my brother is a complete psychopath.
Well, that's the idea. I'm glad that they were able to inspire children to do insane things.
I mean, I'm sure that was their goal too.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so we watch a couple mumblecore movies
Yeah.
that we're definitely not going to do full episodes on, but let's run over them real quick here.
Yeah.
We watched Funny Haha,
Oh yeah.
which was like,
It was all right.
it was okay.
There's some standout moments that I will be like scorched into my brain for the rest of my days.
It was
like, you
yeah.
need to get some hummus in your tummy.
Yeah. It was my Letterboxd review was delightfully just fine. It's not. I don't think it was trying to be anything too
No.
amazing. It was nice to watch. I enjoyed the characters, whatever. And then we watched Hannah Takes the Stairs.
It was odd.
Not quite as good.
There was some standout moments for sure, but it was definitely odd.
Less delightful.
Greta Gerwig was good in it. You could see the potential for her future films for sure.
No stairs in sight. Not a
I
single
think it's supposed to
stair
be
to
like
be
a
seen.
metaphor for something that is lost to me. That she is going up the stairs for each potential boyfriend she has. I don't know. Whatever.
And then we also watched Slacker, which was kind of
that was
like
great.
kind of like pre-mumblecore, honestly. But I think
inspired mumblecore, I would say.
yeah, Slacker came out in 1990. I think once we reach the 1990s in our chronological film list, we might loop back around to this topic and do a full episode on it. Because I think at that point, a few months down the line, I'm going to have some things to say.
I found it to be a really interesting movie. They had some good visual aspects. Like, they kept it moving like it was one sort of continuous story. I think it takes place maybe over the course of like
You're giving away our future episode here. What are you
doing?
Evening.
I just want to say, like, I found it to be really interesting and a good precursor for Richard Linklater's works, except for School of Rock. But wouldn't it be great if School of Rock was just them walking around talking about rock, though?
It would be pretty good.
Yeah.
So if you want a little taste of what that future episode might be like, you can check out at least my Letterboxd review of it.
I haven't posted it yet. I'm bad about that.
I've said in the past that my Letterboxd name is Winesty, and I'm annoyed about that, and I wish I could change it.
Yeah.
I guess in the back of my mind, I always kind of thought, I probably can change it. I'm just not trying hard enough. Nope. You can only change it if you pay.
Oh, I see.
Which is a bit ridiculous if you ask me, but
I suppose.
I do like Letterboxd. So all this is just feeding into that same feeling that we've kind of like been putting off talking about Citizen Kane because it has such a high reputation. It's considered the greatest film ever made. We finished it last night. It was like 1 a.m. I was like, do you want to record the podcast before going to bed? You were like, no. I was also like, no.
Well, because it was like midnight.
No, it was 1 a.m. I just said that.
Oh, sorry. I missed that part. But like, yeah, by the time we would have wrapped, it would have been like 2:30 or something like that.
And then we ended up going to bed at 2 anyway. Because I was reading about Citizen Kane.
Well, then we would have wrapped at like 3.
Yeah.
So,
which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at this point, let's just jump right into it. So, the logline for Citizen Kane, 1941, directed by and starring Orson Welles, co-written by Orson Welles as well. Following the death of publishing tycoon Charles Foster Kane, reporters scrambled to uncover the meaning of his final utterance. Rosebud. Wow, you took a great opportunity to take a few healthy gulps of coffee there.
I know, when you're like doing your whisper.
That's a little ASMR moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so right off the bat, I have to ask, what's your secret for being so good looking?
I don't know. I think you should ask yourself that.
Ask me why you're so good looking?
Yeah, sure.
Well, you have a fantastic nose.
Well,
hey, dog.
Hold for dog.
I wanted to leave the sliding door open for this one to get a nice cool breeze, but apparently that dog has some Citizen Kane opinions.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier.
Yeah, I'll cut in Hannah's pre-record remark about the dog right here.
I should put the microphone up to the dog and be like, what are your thoughts on Citizen Kane? He's like, it was pretty good.
And we're back.
As you were saying about my nose, it might change later on. So who's to say?
Yeah. Do you want to give the audience a little more context there?
Oh, I'm just having like a surgery for it. It's not like anything like superficial. It's
like cosmetic. It's not cosmetic.
Yeah. It's not like I'm like, oh, my nose is bad, but like, no, it is. It internally.
It's for
bad.
breathing.
Yeah. Anyways.
Well, I love your nose no matter what. But you have plenty
so
of other great features. You have fantastic eyes. I love looking into your eyes.
You're so sweet.
Your lips are excellent. Your bottom lip in particular is just fantastic.
That's completely the standout. Fabulous.
Yeah. I love your teeth. Just like tapping on them with my fingers is like probably one of my favorite things.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, this is not Citizen Kane related.
I'd rather talk about you for like 45 minutes than Citizen Kane.
Very sweet.
But I'm biased.
So that feels like that's your opinion about Citizen Kane, is you don't want to talk about it.
No, in fact, I enjoyed Citizen Kane. I think that just goes to show how much more I enjoy you over Citizen Kane.
I'm like semi-blushing. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a straight out the gate thought that you want to share about Charles Foster Kane?
Okay, well, it's very interesting because we just watched a video about how you shouldn't say that cinematography is good because then it doesn't serve the purpose of the film.
Yeah, and you should use adjectives that explain sort of like how it supported the story or whatever, like how it made you feel, instead of just being like, oh, the cinematography was great. but I think we kind of disagreed with the premise of
I
this
feel
of this video. Go ahead.
well, as a camera person, I just feel like I fundamentally disagree because there's so many ways that camera work, cinematography can be good. Like the video is about Roger Deakins in particular. If you look at his body of work, like there's no two movies that look exactly the same. Like they all look very different because they serve the purpose of the film, but they are all still good.
Mm-hmm.
They just light and use camera work effectively in their story, but they're all good in different ways. So I don't like them being like, oh, you can't say it's pretty, because it can be pretty. Like I was saying, Frances Ha is pretty for what it needs to be. It's nothing like spectacular, but it's good. It serves the purpose. But Shawshank Redemption is good for what it needs to be, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. All this to say is I thought the camera work, the cinematography in Citizen Kane was really good, and the story to be kind of boring.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
here's exactly what they said you shouldn't say, but I don't care.
Here's what I'll say about Citizen Kane, particularly about the story. This is the kind of thing where, I watched it and I enjoyed certain aspects of it, but reading about it made me enjoy it more.
Oh, well, sure.
Just because it brought certain things to my attention.
Okay.
And I'll answer the question straight out. Is it the greatest film of all time?
No.
No. Is it a great film? I think it's a great film.
Yeah, I think it's very influential.
I hope to explain why I think it's a great film.
Yeah.
So, regarding the plot, it's the same sort of thing that happened when we saw Licorice Pizza, where we were kind of like, this story is very specific and kind of all over the place. It's almost as if it's like a partial biopic. And then I read about it, and it kind of was. It was based on a specific person who like sold waterbeds or whatever his character did in that. Right. So reading about this, it was in fact, it was based on several people.
Sure.
One of which being Orson Welles himself.
Interesting.
But the general story about like an influential newspaper magnate. Is that how you say it? Magnet doesn't sound right.
Not completely sure.
Maybe the dog knows.
Yeah, you could still hear it in the distance.
He sounds like he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But basically the general idea of it was based on a newspaper magnate named William Randolph Hearst.
Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with that name.
Yeah. And let's just say there's a lot on the Wikipedia page and the IMDb trivia about this guy's reaction to this film. Let's just say he was not happy. And
who cares?
he banned all mention of the film from his newspapers.
Wow,
and he just like accused Orson Welles of being a communist, tried to get the film to be like not released, tried to like take down Orson Welles and put him in compromising positions. Allegedly either him or like an employee of his newspaper sent like a 14-year-old girl to hide in his hotel room with a photographer on standby to take incriminating pictures so that they could like ruin Orson Welles.
Wow.
And this guy was not happy with this film.
That kind of contradicts like the persona of Citizen Kane though, because like he's honest to a fault.
Okay, I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because there is a piece of trivia where Orson Welles encounters oh my gosh, I already forgot his name. William Randolph Hearst in an elevator. And Orson Welles, like, the two of them are in this elevator and they're aware that this controversy is going on. Hearst isn't saying anything to Orson Welles, and Orson Welles is like, "Hey, do you want to come see the film?" And apparently Hearst just like didn't reply and just went to like get off the elevator. And Orson Welles was like, Charles Foster Kane would have gone to see it.
Oh ho ho.
So that is, I guess, what he felt was like the fundamental difference between the real life person on which much of it was based and the persona.
Right, because Charles Foster Kane was all about like, what will people think of me?
Right.
And like trying to keep like a brave front.
Wanting to be the center of attention, wanting to be loved.
Yeah.
So let's run through a few things sort of towards the beginning and moving into the meat of it. Bold title card, which I appreciated.
I liked it, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm probably going to be constantly referencing the trivia page on here, but that's okay. Andy's Trivia Corner doesn't need to be a corner. It can be an entire room, a playroom, in fact, that we record the podcast in.
Sure.
So the film's opening with just the title and no star names was unprecedented for 1941.
Oh, true.
It is now the industry norm for Hollywood blockbusters.
Right, because normally, like, you have the preamble of, like, here's who's in this motion picture for, like, a couple minutes, and it kind of, like, ruins the audience's first impression of the film, because it, like, loses all momentum. You're like, all right, I'm sitting looking at credits, and now here's the movie. Whereas I feel like putting it at the end, like, hopefully a movie gives you sort of an awe reaction or keeps you thinking, so then you can keep those thoughts and that momentum going while the credits are rolling at the end.
Totally.
That's my perception of things.
I feel like the best movies that we've ever seen in theaters are movies where we sat through the credits.
Yeah, because you're just like, I just don't want to leave this moment in time.
Yeah, exactly. Just wanted to soak it all in.
Yeah.
And just think about it.
I remember watching Whiplash in particular. I watched this at home, though, but still. I remember watching it, and just, like, as the credits was rolling, I was like, oh my gosh, that was amazing.
I know.
Just, like, but, like, that's a little bit harder to do up front, because, like, you don't know what the movie is. So.
Right. Yeah. Unless they do something really creative with the opening titles and engaging, it's sometimes ends up being kind of a waste of runtime.
Yeah. Like, well, I would say, like, a movie like Napoleon Dynamite is, they tried to, the good perception of opening credits should be like, let's set the tone that you are going to be familiar with for the rest of the film.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, here's, like, a quirky movie, and, like, the little props that they have, like, the names on, like, kind of give away what Napoleon is like and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like making something interesting out of the typically mundane is almost like the thesis statement of the film. And I think that is exemplified nicely in, like, you know, writing the credits on pencils and, like, in mustard on a sandwich.
Right, for sure. Well, I would say, like, back then in the 40s, I'm not familiar with any films that creatively started doing credits. I'm not sure when that would have first been a thing, but, like, back then it was just like, here's the cast of players. Let's stay on this one screen for 30 seconds.
Right.
And, like, it just didn't get interesting until later on.
Right. So with regards to, you know, changing the industry standard in like a new way.
Mm-hmm. I liked it.
From what I've read, reading just through the Wikipedia article, it seems like the theme of Citizen Kane is that it was very influential to things that came after.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it appeared to pioneer certain techniques.
That makes sense.
When in actuality, those techniques had been used in the past, but Citizen Kane was just a film that brought together a lot of uncommon techniques and shoved them into the spotlight. So
that makes sense.
In a way, it is following along the lines of Steal Like an Artist.
That's what I was thinking.
Like, take from various different sources to create something that seems completely new, even though it's not. But at the same time, I also read that, you know, this was Orson Welles' first film.
That is an awesome debut.
Yeah. And so when asked, you know, why he was able to do things so unconventionally, he just said it was basically ignorance for not being steeped in what the standard was. Coming at it as a newcomer, he was able to do things differently.
Just like fresh eyes.
Yeah. So I don't know how true that is, because it seemed like a lot more thought was put into it than, you know, I just didn't know what I was doing, so I did it differently.
Well, I would say, like, maybe part of that is modesty, but part of it is, you know, up to that point, maybe he was just a film appreciator, and he's like, okay, I would imagine, this is my perception, is other directors in the same sort of canon are like, these are my favorite movies. This is what I like about these movies. This is what I want to copy. But he copied a lot of different things, so it seemed new.
He copied several different things, yeah.
He copied, yes.
But, well, it's interesting. You're, like, setting me up perfectly for some of these pieces of trivia. There's the dog again. Evidently, from what I've read, I'm probably going to say from what I've read like 1,000 times this episode, he said he didn't really start appreciating film until he was in the midst of production on Citizen Kane. Okay. Because before that, he was more immersed in, like, radio and theater, because he
That
did
makes
that whole
sense.
radio War of the Worlds production. And so sound design was very important to him because he came from a radio
That's really
background.
evident in one particular scene.
What scene?
There's a scene where he's in a tent with Suzanne.
I think it's just Susan.
And he like slaps her, but she's like stone faced, and so is he. But in the background, it's like a girl shrieking, like ah, ah! And
Yeah.
at first, you're like, is that going on at the party? But no, I think it's just supposed to be like visual or like audio interest.
Right. So I think at some point, like later in the episode, I'll get more into the actual techniques. But here's just another couple random thoughts as we were going through it. The beginning of it was almost like a horror thriller when they're showing the shots of like the dilapidated. Oh my gosh, what's it called? Even the character in the film couldn't remember what it was called. What was his
like an empty house
castle called?
Xanadu.
Xanadu.
Well, he said that as a joke. He's like, I knew it the whole time, and I'm sure you caught on to that. But I just...
Did he say that?
Yes,
I
he
missed
did.
That part.
He's like, I'm just saying crazy names because Xanadu is crazy, or like whatever, Leland, I think.
Right. Yeah. That character I was a little bit confused about because when they showed him in the future, they called him Leland and he had a mustache. But when they showed him in the past, they called him Jedediah and he didn't have a mustache. So I didn't understand that those two were the same character at first.
Fair.
Until the movie very kindly showed a shot where we're in his office and we see the door and it says Jed Leland and we see his face. And then I'm like, okay, thank you for clearing up the confusion.
Well,
I appreciate that.
I'm sure they clarified early on that like his name was Jed Leland.
Well, you just called me stupid?
No, I just probably missed it. I mean, there's certain things I glossed over myself.
Right. So the first shot in it that's very visually striking is like the snow globe shot.
Oh,
it's almost like a quick succession of like a few shots where it drops, it breaks, and then we see the woman walk in like through the perspective of the snow globe.
That was so dope.
Super cool.
Yeah.
But then after that, when they started showing like the newsreel, started to get a bit tiring.
Yep.
But I completely understand why they did that, because they were trying to show that it's less of a story of like what's going to happen, and it's more of a story of like things have already happened and we're just revealing information to the audience. We want the audience to feel inquisitive and want to peel back the layers.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, I thought that the story was very successful in its structure. I really loved the structure where you hear different aspects of his life from different people. And it's almost like you talk to the first person, you start close to the beginning, and then you talk and reveal the story until we're close to the end. Then we talk to the next person and we go back in time a little bit and reveal a little bit more. Talk to the next person, we go back a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I thought that structure was fantastic. And I was talking to you,
very interesting,
and another friend about this off mic, that I feel like Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill are two movies where the story is told out of order for no good reason. And any audience listeners out there, if you have a good reason proposed for why Pulp Fiction and especially Kill Bill is told out of order, I'd love to hear it.
Well, my perception, at least for Pulp Fiction, is it's supposed to read like a pulpy book that you would find at like a newsstand or airport or whatever, and it's just a bunch of like weird short stories woven together.
Well, in that regard, it almost feels as if the short stories originally were not related until Tarantino is like, oh, well, these two characters in these two stories are close enough. I'll just make them the same character to make the world feel more connected. But then at that point, it's like, well, why is it out of order? Whereas I felt like Citizen Kane had a very good reason to be told out of order, is because the reporter is talking to different people. They all have different perspectives of his life. Sure. They were there for some aspects of his life, but not others. And I thought that was super effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you don't like the story, evidently.
I like the structure of it. I just found the meat, like the bones were good, but the meat and potatoes of it, I was like, I'm not really sure if I'm on Kane's side, you know?
I don't know if you're really supposed to be.
Like, again, like I really enjoyed the visual interest of this film, but like the actual plot, I was like, I don't know. It just wasn't like grabbing me as much as like I hoped it would be.
I mean, I don't disagree. This is why I think it's not the greatest film of all time, because technically it has a lot of great stuff going for it.
Oh yeah.
Both from like the cinematography, which I'll get into in a bit, and the editing and the acting, which I'll definitely get into.
For sure.
But story-wise, I thought it was serviceable.
Serviceable.
Not amazing, but I didn't hate the story.
Yeah. Well, see, maybe it's just because we've had such a trumped up view of it. Like, to me, I'm like, this can't be the best film of all time because, like, it's just not as interesting as other films. Speaking
of trumped up view, this is Donald Trump's favorite movie.
Well, that
Can
makes
you
a
guess
lot of
why?
sense because he basically is Citizen Kane. Except he did become president somehow.
So, jumping back, loved the reveal of like basically the first shot of Kane in his prime, like Kane as a young man. You know, we see him a couple of times in the newsreel. He's like a little bit older, camera's a little bit further away. We see him younger, but then the first shot where he's like in his prime, it was such a great reveal because we have like a quick montage of Thatcher reading the newspaper headlines.
Right.
And it's like headline to headline to headline to headline to headline. And then the paper comes down and it's Kane.
That was great, yeah.
That's such a good reveal.
Mm-hmm. Like, oh, here's this guy that's like making a big noise in New York.
Making a big noise.
Yeah.
A big old toot.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
What noise did you mean?
Just like creating a vibe.
Like a metaphorical toot.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, like I really like the line reading of the old guy, Mr. Thatcher, and he's like, I think it would be fun to run a newspaper.
Yeah. I love the acting all around, but I will say what?
Suzanne when she's old.
Susan?
I swear it's Suzanne.
It's
I don't
Susan.
know. Whatever.
Susie, okay, I see your.
Susie,
I see
when
your
she's old,
this.
pretending to be drunk, she's like, "All I got was singing lessons." I'm like, I don't buy this woman.
Well, okay, I was halfway through my statement there. Okay. What I was going to say was, I love the acting all around. However, Orson Welles is completely outclassing every other actor in the film, in my opinion.
Well, and he's the star. Sure.
I thought he was excellent.
He was, yeah. Especially coming back from like a theater experience. I'm assuming he was a theatrical actor, but I don't know for sure. He definitely played it sort of in a theater way, all the different types of characters.
Sure. Like his timing, his delivery, the rhythm to his speech. He's just like a magnet for the audience.
Yeah.
You know?
Very grandiose charisma.
Yeah. Like you just gravitate towards him. And I thought, you know, there were several scenes where there's actors doing things in the foreground, but Kane is doing something else in the background. Mm-hmm. But your eyes are still drawn to Kane, even though he's out of focus, because like you just gravitate towards him. And I also thought it was interesting that there were a couple of scenes where Kane is hidden in shadow, but he's still
silhouetted.
Yeah, he's still stealing the scene, even though the other actors are lit properly and he's in shadow, because he just pulls you in, right?
For sure.
And his delivery was so confident and awesome.
He's like, there will not be a war. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, I just thought he was fantastic.
Yeah.
And this leads me to what is probably the thing that I loved most about this film.
Okay, give it to me.
Is that I thought it was so convincingly played, the idea of him aging, that at certain points I really didn't know how old Orson Welles was. And I didn't know like at what point was he playing his true age. And I'll compare it to another film. I think it's either called Charlie Chaplin or it's just called Chaplin.
Right, with Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, I think it was like in the 90s. That film was made like 50 years later. And yet the aging technology, like makeup or whatever, was so uncomfortable to the point where in the final scene where he's supposed to be at his oldest, he just looked like Mr. Potato Head.
Ew.
It was just like, I couldn't take him seriously at all. But with Orson Welles in Citizen Kane, not only was the makeup like completely convincing in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that he played him with just like having such a nice young bright voice in the beginning, and then as he got older, just like lowering his register.
Oh my
to
gosh!
the point
Oh my
where
gosh!
he's just talking all low.
When Susan left him and he was throwing stuff around in her bedroom, and he was like stumbling around as like an old man that was like hefty, I was cackling because he's just like oofishly like knocking stuff off shelves, stumbling around. Oh my gosh, that was so funny.
Absolutely. Well, I have something to say to that,
Yeah.
but I'll get to it in a minute. So I loved that, just like his jowliness, his portliness as he got older, his thinning hair, his graying hair,
the double chin,
all his wrinkles. Like, because the first time we see Orson Welles on screen, I think it's one of his older versions of himself when he's giving an interview. And he's like, when I was in the game, we asked the questions faster than that. Come on. And so that being our first impression to Orson Welles in the film, I was like, was Orson Welles like 50 when this was shot?
I thought he was 25.
And then when we see him as a young man, he looks so young.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, so it was just like completely makeup in the other scene. And yeah, he was 25, which is like a 25-year-old playing like what, like probably like a 70-year-old.
Yeah, I think they said he died when he was 70.
Yeah, however old he ended up, was like, I couldn't believe how convincing that was. For 1941,
yeah,
I thought that was excellent.
Well, I'm sure the black and white helped.
Yeah, the black and white and like the slightly less crisp quality.
For sure. In general, just going back to theater background, in theater, you're more likely to see a young person play a super old person.
Right.
So I think having that background coming from radio, all that stuff, he probably has a bigger breadth of work where he can draw from being young, draw from being old, whereas nowadays that's less called upon.
Yeah, and he probably knew how to manipulate his voice a lot better to get that gruff, like I'm old kind of thing, because he would have been essentially a voice actor.
Yeah,
and voice actors
I don't 100%
incredibly
know
talented.
His background. Yeah, of course. If he was a voice actor, which I'm assuming he was, then yes, absolutely.
Right. So my favorite scene that exemplified that makeup was the breakfast montage when they're going through his first marriage, and they do a scene, and then a couple of years pass and they do another scene in the same spots, and it's cut together so excellently.
For sure.
And I got a bit of trivia about this. I won't read it directly, but I'll basically paraphrase, is that the guy who did the makeup for like the aging effects and all that in Citizen Kane was basically an apprentice.
Really?
Yeah. So he was an apprentice. He wasn't like head of the department or whatever. But Orson Welles loved what he did. But when it came time to give credit, technically the head of the department, who didn't do any work on it, I guess, was meant to get credit. And the head of the department was like, I'm not going to share credit. I'm not going to give credit to this guy because he's an apprentice. He doesn't deserve it. And so Orson Welles put up an ad in the Los Angeles newspaper, or like not an advertisement, but just like
a notice.
A notice.
Yeah.
And here's what it said. Thanks to everybody who gets screen credit for Citizen Kane, and thanks to those who don't. To all the actors, the crew, the office, the musicians, everybody, and particularly to Maurice Siderman, the best makeup man in the world.
Wow.
That is amazing.
That pays to do good work and not be a jerk.
Yeah.
To get the shout out of a lifetime, I would say.
Yeah. But so anyway, there was so much technically that I enjoyed about this, like the makeup, the overlapping dialogue.
Yeah, from a technical aspect, I really enjoy this film.
Yeah. From what I read, they pioneered a lot of interesting tactics, like deep focus, of having the entire scene be in focus.
We were talking about that, yeah.
I can't say personally that having deep focus in this film like meant a lot to my enjoyment of it. I did think that it was interesting that there were certain shots where there was a character in the foreground that was in focus and a character that was in the background that was in focus, but then there was still other parts of the scene that were out of focus. Evidently, they used some in-camera tricks to accomplish that. Like
I found that to be really effective, though.
lighting one part of the scene and keeping it in focus, and then the other half of the frame would be dark, filming it, then rewinding the film, darkening the original half of the frame that was lit, lighting the other half, and then recording the film again to light the two halves of the frame separately, record them twice, and have them both be in focus.
I think they did that in Rushmore, or like a similar sort of thing where they did like an in-camera rewind.
Interesting. Oh, who put that table there?
Yeah.
And then some other stuff like Orson Welles apparently wanted to film very like high status, low status kind of thing. Like if you notice the scene
100%
with Kane and Leland after Kane loses the election, it's shot from like a super, super low angle.
Yes.
Evidently they had to cut a hole in the floor and like drill out concrete to get the camera low enough. And as a result of that, their sets needed to have ceilings.
Oh, I didn't even think of that.
Because most sets wouldn't have ceilings so that they could get the lights there.
True.
So it's very interesting stuff like that.
Yeah. See, that's a good perspective of I can notice how interesting a shot is. I can see from a camera perspective, oh, like, wow, it's shot from a low angle to show like their stature, and it's like a wide angle. So it shows them like big and grandiose, like a statue. But I didn't even think of the ceiling.
Yeah.
So I can still notice how good the cinematography is and not be pulled out of the story.
Exactly. And then the editing, like I loved how a lot of the time when they did fades from the present time to the flashback, they would do it in such a way where if you were to pause halfway through the fade, it would still be a nice composition.
For sure.
Because the part of the scene that is fading away. So if you picture it in your head like this, right? We're on a shot of old Leland and his face takes up the left side of the frame. The right side of the frame basically has either no detail or is just darkness. So then when they start the fade, they're fading to a shot where the right side of the frame has the detail and has the action and the thing that they're fading to, and the left side of the frame has darkness. So they get halfway through the fade, and then they start kind of like milking that fade for a few frames. So you see both images on screen at the same time, but they don't really like hold on it. It's still fading, but you get that nice,
it's really effective. Yeah.
You get that nice juxtaposition of old to new.
Yeah.
And I feel like not enough movies continue to use that. You know, if it's a fade, it's just like, whatever, it's a fade.
Like in, what is it? Superman 2, they had like the worst editing. Where it was like terrible. Really egregious fading. And it was like, what is the purpose of this? See, like he says he's not familiar with movies, Orson Welles, but like that's a director that has a really good perception of what the film is going to come together and look like as a whole. Like planning that ahead of time, like you are probably shooting out of order and knowing, okay, the scene of Leland is going to come before the scene of Citizen Kane. So I want to make sure he's on the left side and then Citizen Kane is on the right side. Mm-hmm. Like that requires a lot of planning.
Yeah, forethought.
I love that.
You know, I think a lot of thought went into this, but
for sure.
I think part of what made it good in my eyes is that I don't think, at least in my opinion, I don't think it was trying to be the greatest, biggest film ever made.
No.
I think Gone with the Wind was trying to be the greatest, biggest film ever made.
It was pretty big.
But I think Orson Welles was just trying to make a good movie.
I agree.
That he found interesting and entertaining.
Yeah. Comparing it to that, because a lot of building up to this, and we referenced Citizen Kane in particular on our journey to watch older films we hadn't seen.
Right.
Was like, you know, we talked about Citizen Kane and how is really innovative and how all the movies came before it were not as good and how it really changed the game. I don't think it did.
I don't know if it did, like...
Fresh on the heels of Gone with the Wind?
I mean, Gone with the Wind had a lot going for it. But I just think Citizen Kane helped people think about film in different ways. Even if maybe it didn't do everything that it was doing for the first time, it brought a lot of those techniques together and it got people thinking.
I think it's a really good movie, and I think a lot of techniques, I mean, the movie as a whole is a lot more like modern cinematography than it is 1940s cinematography. But in general, I don't know if it's like mind-blowing, but I think it definitely has its place in film history, and obviously influenced a lot after it. Wes Anderson in particular. Um, he's one of his favorite directors of all time. A lot of the shared DNA in this movie comes out. You know, watching scenes of Citizen Kane, I'm like, oh, that's similar to, you know, how Wes Anderson stacks his characters. Like, just going back to him, Orson Welles, coming from a theater background, a lot of the mise en scène of the frames were characters being stacked in a way that is more like theater. You know, there's a shot in particular of, I can't remember what this guy's name. He was like a secretary at the newspaper or something. There's a shot of Citizen Kane walking to Leland's door, and he's slowly going out of frame, and we see like the secretarial guy in the foreground. I found that to be really interesting and really different from other 1940s films that we saw. So just seeing like how everything is placed and the wide angle, and how, you know, in photography we call it like rule of thirds. There's the golden rule. You feel like there's specific visual interest in symmetry or knolling in each of the scenes. Like everyone is purposely put in the scene. It's not just like, okay, here's a character and we're just going to point the camera at them. Like, it's all intentional.
Yeah, like maybe it felt like the cinematography in His Girl Friday was a little more like that, where it's just like, we're just, you know, the actors are here, I'm going to point the camera at them, and maybe not a whole lot of thought was put into it.
But it served its own purpose. That movie was a lot more of a talky movie and a lot more story driven.
Yeah. It's interesting what you say about stacking characters, because that makes me think of a time that actually we did that in college. If you remember when we filmed Dry Town, when we were filming Dry Town,
oh boy,
with those standard definition 4x3 cameras, which I can't believe they were still using in 2014. But
yeah, they looked like garbage.
2014, 2015.
Yeah.
But we had a shot like that where we stacked the characters like, I think, what was the main character of Dry Town's name?
I can't even remember. He was like a detective.
Right.
I want to say it was like Jake or something. It was totally like a Chinatown ripoff.
Anyway, he was in the foreground, and then we had like the main villain in the midground, and then the
Dick
punk,
Cranium.
whatever. Yeah, Richard Cranium.
Richard Cranium
in the background.
Yeah.
I think the 4x3 aspect ratio is a really fun aspect ratio to do those kinds of things in, with stacking characters with not a lot of wasted negative space.
Right.
Which is interesting. But anyway, back to
utilizing the Z axis, which I feel like wasn't as utilized before up to that point in cinema. Everything was a lot more 180-degree character lines. Like, okay, here's the character on the left, here's the character on the right. Maybe there's a character, you know, on the other side, but they're all mostly 180-degree. Whereas with Citizen Kane, particularly that one shot I had said of him walking towards the Leland's door, you see them on a diagonal, which seems like it's not reinventing the wheel, but
it's great.
Back then, didn't really see a lot of that.
Right.
So
it just feels like a lot of thought was put into it. Like another shot that I really liked, that it didn't use the Z axis as much, but it's a shot where the reporter is talking to, again, whatever the guy's name is that worked in the newspaper. I apologize that I can't remember his name. It's like the second or third guy that the reporter goes to see with the glasses.
Yeah.
And they walk over to the fireplace, and the camera like slowly zooms out, or dollies out really. And then you see the giant portrait of Charles Foster Kane above.
True.
But it's not just that it's there. It's like the camera starts to frame itself almost as if Kane from the afterlife is like watching them discuss, and he's like, try and figure it out.
That's fascinating.
You know?
Yeah,
that's what I took from it.
There's a shot like later in the scene where that guy is sitting down, and there's a lot of negative space that I really enjoyed, because as a camera person, I tend to shoot with a lot of negative space intentionally. Sometimes for cropping reasons, sometimes just because I like to see the background of what is going on in images. And, some people are like, you gotta shoot tight in the frame and like you should only be showing what you should be showing. But I think negative space can be used really effectively sometimes within a frame. So.
Yeah. It's used pretty effectively in Mr. Robot to show sort of like isolation.
Yeah, that's kind of the trademark of that style, right? Like even if it's a close up of a character, it has like tons of headroom.
Right. So one of the last things that I want to talk about is just sort of the legacy.
Yeah.
And in that, like, it didn't really do well at first.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
It seems a little esoteric for the general audience.
Right. Well, it says, very first piece of trivia on IMDb says, despite all the publicity, the film was a box office flop and was quickly consigned to the RKO vaults. At the 1941 Academy Awards, the film was booed every time one of its 9 nominations was announced.
That's amazing.
It was only re-released to the public in the mid-1950s.
Should have worn or I don't know if they won, or they should have won like best makeup.
Oh, at the very least.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what it won for. I think it won for screenplay.
Meh. Again, the structure was really good. It was just like the meat of it. I'm like, eh.
Right. Again, yeah, not the most amazing story, but
comparing it to, I want to say Rebecca was released earlier in the same year. I find Rebecca to be a more interesting story.
It's definitely more engaging.
Yeah.
More well written, I would say.
And that equally had good cinematography, just in a different way. In particular, the shot of Laurence Olivier in front of the projector. They're looking at their honeymoon footage. Amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of very haunting images in that. But I mean, of course, like Hitchcock is one of the greats as well. So.
Right. So one of the final things that I want to talk about here is something that I did not understand before watching this movie, and now I understand.
Okay.
And it is why The Room has been called the Citizen Kane of bad movies. At first, I thought it was called that because Citizen Kane is considered to be the greatest movie of all time. So I thought it was The Room was being considered the greatest bad movie ever made.
That was my perception.
But now that I've seen Citizen Kane, I think there's a lot more comparisons to be drawn. And it dawned on me in the scene where Kane is tearing apart the bedroom.
Yes.
Mirrored so closely the scene where Johnny is tearing apart him and Lisa's bedroom. It was like a key was being turned in my mind. And I was like, I get it now. These scenes are both about men who wanted it all and had it all, and then it all fell apart, and they destroyed a bedroom in a silly fit of rage, and then they died alone.
Yes. Well, if you think about it, Tommy Wiseau is Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
He
totally.
He tries so hard to be loved. He's rich for some reason.
From selling leather jackets.
Don't really know why. For sure. He has like a mysterious aura around him. Very charismatic. Does everything to want people to like him, but it's unclear if he has like love for others. Like his relationship with Greg, and that's part of the reason why The Disaster Artist is such an interesting book.
Such a great book.
Is like there is definitely a friendship there, and like we understand how Greg feels about Tommy. Like there's obviously some love, but also like some hate. But it's hard to really know like what Tommy actually thinks of him.
Mm-hmm.
It's very fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now that I've seen Citizen Kane, I almost want to watch The Room for probably like the 10th time.
Yeah.
But
what we really need is a Tommy Wiseau biopic in the style of Citizen Kane.
Hello, Wind.
Gone
that would actually be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that goes into not just the development of The Room, but just Tommy's life.
Everything. Well, general. And just the Disaster Artist aspects of him being friends with Greg, talking on the phone. Oh, I'm eating oranges in bed.
About a treadmill.
Yeah.
But that begs the question. So like I mentioned having watched The Room like 10 times. Would you rewatch Citizen Kane?
Yeah.
I definitely would.
I think it would be better to see it in a theater.
Yeah.
Yeah. With live music or something.
Sure. I mean, I guess like music is probably one of the only things that I didn't really pick up on hugely in the film. So I'd want to rewatch it again just to get a little bit more of a sense of that.
I don't think it was anything I don't think it was anything like amazing, but I think the music served its purpose of the film. Sure. And in a way that makes it effective because we didn't notice there being music or lack of music. Whereas in Frankenstein that came before it, like 10 years before, you're like,
Where's the music?
Where's the music? There's no music.
Yeah. But it knew when to not use music.
Yeah.
Citizen
See,
Kane.
and I wouldn't even be able to tell you when the music was playing or not because I was more focused on the characters, which is mostly the point of music in cinema.
Right. Very last sort of random comment that I want to mention of like one of my favorite things that happened in the movie was when they finish off the flashback when he's talking to Susan, and they end it by I think it's like he tears apart, or no, he hasn't torn apart the room yet. They end the flashback with Kane watching Susan walk out through this long hallway, and it's shot from
That's really good.
It's shot from Kane's perspective, peering down this long hallway. You see the doors open, and it's very visually striking. Flashback ends. Then the reporter goes to talk to the next person, and his flashback starts at exactly the same moment, but filmed from the other side of the hallway.
That was effective.
Looking down the other way at Charles Foster Kane. That blew me away. I'm sorry, but it positively blew me away. I was like, that was such an effective cut.
And they didn't hold on that scene. But as we were saying while we were watching it, the bird kind of ruined it.
The bird wrecked it.
It was like, there's like a jump scare of a bird. I was like, Wah! I was like, what?
It's like that may have been one of my favorite movie moments, except for the fact that the bird just like randomly screamed.
It's like, why? Maybe that was like actually there on set and they're like, yeah, leave it in.
I really doubt it. I mean, we saw it visually too.
That's true. Yeah. It was like there was monkeys earlier. I guess it's to show that Xanadu is kind of like a wild place. I don't know.
Okay, I'm willing to live with it knowing that Xanadu is a place that had animals. I feel a little bit better about it now.
Still, like, if you think about it, it's like, okay, why does this bird need to be in this scene?
Right.
It's not really a reason, but
Not
whatever.
really. Okay, so before we wrap up, we should probably talk about the ending.
Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts? Do you have a take on it?
Yes.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so this ending has always been ruined for me.
Yep. I think I said in a previous episode it was ruined for me in an episode of The Real Ghostbusters.
Yeah. This was ruined for me in film school when I watched essays about the meaning of the ending.
Right.
And I think it's commonly used as sort of like a motif thing where it's like, this is an item that represents what the character is thinking.
Yep.
Blah, blah, blah. Like Piggy with the conch in Lord of the Flies.
I don't want to talk about Piggy. You're going to make me depressed.
Oh, yeah. R.I.P. Piggy. Justice for Piggy.
Whoa, spoilers for Lord of the Flies, man.
You
know how many pre-high school listeners we have that haven't read Lord of the Flies yet? Come on.
Yeah, so I think the use of the item was effective, and I probably would have liked the ending better if I didn't see it coming the whole film.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because we both had it spoiled for us, but I did really like sort of like the pre-ending before we see the actual item.
Yes.
Where the guy is saying like, "Oh, I don't think it meant anything. Maybe it was something he had and lost, or maybe it was something he could never get. But I don't think a man's life can be summed up in one word." And I
think you can.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's probably not like a hot take of what we think it represents, and we're probably thinking along the same lines. But do you want to share how you felt about it?
It's like a childhood lost, and he talks about like, if I wasn't a rich man, I could have been a good man.
Mm-hmm.
And just like his life before he was rich and became like this monster of a man, this titan of a man.
Exactly. Almost like the last time he was truly happy.
Yes.
And had innocence,
Yeah, like playing in the snow.
Yeah. I hate that loss of innocence is such like a trope or whatever, but I think it's appropriate in this aspect.
I found it interesting that he actually still had the sled, because in an earlier scene they showed it left in the snow. So I perceived it to be something that was left behind that he could never return to. Like there's sort of a famous quote, like, you can never go home again. Like even if you were to return to the same spot, it's not really the feeling of who you were in that moment.
Yeah, I think metaphorically that's still true in the context of the story, but they do explain it, because at one point he says he's going to go visit like a storage unit that has all the stuff from his mom when she died.
Right.
So that would have been how he got it back.
Right. And I really well, okay, let me backtrack a little bit. So in that end scene where we were talking about, the man saying like, we'll never really know. And they like do a zoom out to reveal how grandiose the room is with all the items. It reminded me of the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
Yes.
Me too.
And I found that to be really good. And I found that to be a really subtle but interesting homage, what I perceive to be an homage, or at least influence. And just hearkening back, like Wes Anderson is very influenced. There's a lot of shots in Citizen Kane that he, maybe is influenced by, like in Life Aquatic, when they're in the theater, there's like a grand shot zooming out that's very similar to Suzanne and the Opera House, like sort of the big shot of seeing the Opera House. And in particular, the cast of characters at the end of Citizen Kane, where they're like, let's introduce all these new characters, and they show a shot of them with their title card. I said at the time, I'm like, this feels very Wes Anderson. And I looked at the Wes Anderson book, and there's actually like a comparison of the title cards in Citizen Kane to the title cards at the end of Royal Tenenbaums, where they did the same thing. And like, I didn't even remember that, but I'm like, this just feels Wes Anderson. Yeah. Like all the symmetry, all the use of interesting lighting and scene stacking, and using the frame effectively, using negative space. That's all things that we credit towards Wes Anderson now, that he was influenced by in directors like Hitchcock, Orson Welles, and
the list goes on.
Stanley Kubrick.
Right.
So I was going to say is the third one.
Steal like an artist.
Absolutely. So just hearkening back to what I was saying before, I don't know why I'm saying hearkening, obviously, but this is a problem with older films. And I don't know if it's studio notes, like how we were saying with Gone with the Wind. It was like, or at least how I said, it should have ended like a minute earlier.
What?
How
Orson or Citizen Kane?
Both. So Gone with the Wind, he's like, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And then it ends. And then she's like, I got to go back to Tara. And it's like, it would have been way more effective to end it like a minute sooner.
Yeah.
And on like a really high, interesting note. Same with Citizen Kane, I feel like, where they finally reveal like, okay, here's the sled. And then they're like, all right, let's all burn this in the incinerator. And then like you see Rosebud being melted, and like all that perception of his childhood, everything about him was gone. Like it's meaningless now. Rosebud in flames. Should have ended the end there. Okay. High note. Would have been way better. Instead, it kind of like goes on a little bit more, shows Xanadu, shows the no trespassing sign again as like a bookend. Oh,
you're right. I forgot about that.
And then puts the end. And it was like, that was unnecessary.
You are completely correct.
It would have been so much better to end it in flames. And I feel like that's maybe what Rebecca does. Is like
I was so confused.
I don't want to ruin Rebecca.
I was so confused when you brought this up, because I was like, what do you mean it does end on the sled? And then you talked about the no trespassing sign, and I was like, my brain blocked that out because it was so unnecessary.
It was. That's what I'm saying. Like, they just don't know how to end a movie. Like, end it on the big note, I feel like. But maybe the studio notes was like, no, we got to wrap this up in a tight, neat little bow. Like, it has to be like this. Blah, blah, blah. It was like, who cares? Yeah. It's a lot more of a modern film thing to just end on like kind of not a cliffhanger, but like just end on like an innocuous kind of note, instead of being like, and here's the cast of characters and this is it and the end, happy ending or whatever. It's like, I don't need it.
Right. Okay, so what would you rate it out of 10 out of 5, however you want to rate it?
This is tough. I really like the cinematography. It was very pretty.
The cinematography was
really
good.
Was really good. it effectively used a lot of techniques. I really like the shot of Citizen Kane walking by the mirror, and you see him going on forever, like in the distance.
That was cool.
Really good. We talked earlier about the scene of deep focus with Leland in the background and Kane in the foreground, and they don't actually face each other. We just like see them kind of talk at a distance. It shows like the actual like emotional distance that they have.
Yeah.
And like there's a lot you could read into that scene. You could write in like an essay about just that scene. I feel like. So the way that they framed things, we talked earlier about how, in a lot of scenes they shot really low to the ground to show like the stature of the men and show how great they are. Like all that stuff, really interesting, tells a really compelling visual story. I'm just not fully on board with the emotional story, perhaps. Or just like, I don't know. It just didn't fully grip me. But it's still effective. I would still recommend it to filmmaker friends. I think it's maybe a little too inside Hollywood for the average viewer. It depends. I don't know if the average person would enjoy this 1940s film.
Right.
But from all those aspects, those technical aspects, amazing. The makeup was really good. Like all that stuff was really good. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I'm sorry, I swallowed.
You're allowed to swallow. This podcast doesn't have a no swallowing policy.
Oh, cool. 8 out of 10, I think is, it's not the best movie ever. Good movie.
But it's better than average, yeah.
Yes.
I would also give it 8. Maybe on a rewatch, I would give it 9.
Maybe.
But as it stands, I feel comfortable giving it an 8.
Yeah.
And I would rewatch it for sure.
Like when we did our first watch of it, the beginning was a lot more boring. It definitely got a lot more interesting as it went along. And as we saw different aspects of Kane's life, I was like, okay, this movie is pretty good. But in the beginning, I was like, this is kind of boring with the newsreel.
Well, I think for me, the draw for it was because I've talked in the past how I enjoy movies with my heart and less so with my head. I attach more to the emotional aspect. For me, I think it was just more about finding it interesting, peeling back the layers on this mysterious man and finding out more about him, finding out more about what made him tick and why he made the decisions that he made.
Yeah,
and why
I think that's
he had
the idea.
like a fall from grace, I was attached to it enough, but I do put forth that the story isn't as good as maybe it could be.
For sure. I was thinking about this as we were watching, actually, if I would recommend it to people. And I was, I'm thinking like, it depends on the person. Like, it depends on how you watch movies. If you're someone that is watching it for head, like a really big thinker, I don't think this is quite it. But if you're watching it from a visual aspect, from like, if you're someone that sees things with the eyes first, like I usually am really drawn to really visually interesting movies, then 100% you should see this.
Right. I would do our one and only recurring segment, Gabe's grades, but he rated it, but he didn't review it. He also gave it 8 out of 10 / 4 out of 5.
Well, let's find out what Sparky thinks. I thought Orson Welles was really good in his debut. I'm really interested to see what other films he did.
Hot take, Sparky.
All right.
Okay. So next episode, I think, is going to be, I'd have to check my list, but what Red Shoes I didn't officially add it to the list, so I don't know where it comes chronologically.
It's one of the next like couple ones, because I know Red Shoes is like one of Gabe's faves, I think.
Right. Okay, so look forward to our next episode, which is either The Maltese Falcon or
Treasure of the Sierra Madre, or
it might be Treasure of the Sierra Madre as
one of those. I don't know.
I don't remember what.
Look at famous 1940s movies, and it might be on there.
It's one of those 40s ones.
Yeah.
The ones.
Red Shoes is 50s.
With the visuals and
yeah.
Okay. Oh, it's definitely not Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
It must be Maltese Falcon.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at the list. It's Maltese Falcon because that's also 1941 as is Citizen Kane.
Right, just later in the same year, I guess.
It's early. It's 11 a.m. I just woke up.
Well, it's probably noon now.
It's 10:57. Give me a break.
No.
Okay. Look forward to our next episode, which is probably Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Nope, it's Maltese Falcon.
We just said it was Maltese Falcon.
Okay, love you all.
Love you.
Big kisses. Bye-bye.
Bye.